it doesn't matter whether you're Democrat or Republican. Energy in America is good for every American, no matter how you vote. And we should have common sense policies around that. And it shouldn't change from one administration to the next. And that's my hope going into election season, regardless of what the outcome is. American energy is good for all Americans. And we need to stop demonizing it and start embracing it.
Now, I know, oil and gas and the energy sector is definitely making news right now. Before we get started, can you share a little bit about the company and your background?
Yeah, I'd love to. So my background, I'm a chemical engineer by degree. So that means I'm a little bit nerdy. I've been in the oil and gas business since 2005. It's kind of become my life. And I've spent time in Texas, Louisiana, North Dakota. I've kind of been all over, like many of my colleagues that are in their early 40s. You tend to travel in oil and gas, but everyone stops in Texas at some point. And today I'm the chief executive officer for Phoenix Capital Group. And Phoenix Capital Group is an E&P company that also does a lot of other things that most larger E&Ps don't do. But we currently have a 2-rig program drilling in North Dakota and Montana. And we're producing somewhere in the neighborhood of 12,000 gross barrels a day on the operating arm. And we have a mineral division that also has somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,000 to 7,000 barrels a day. So we like to fashion ourselves as a company that does a little bit of everything in the space. We operate like the household names, the Chevrons. And then we have a non-op portfolio that's spread across 9 states, including Texas, and where we own minerals and non-op working interests. So that's who we are and what we do.
That's pretty cool. Now, when you talk about minerals, because some people might not know, what are some of the minerals that you mine for?
Yeah, so we are purely oil and gas. So in the mineral space, I'll nerd out just a little bit here. Most people don't understand the concept of a severed estate. So let's start with the basics. The surface estate, everyone understands that. You can go to Zillow, you can find out who owns the surface. Determining who owns the mineral estate is much more difficult, and that's where we have specific expertise. And even in the mineral estate, it can be chopped up amongst different depths, different resources. So it gets really complicated. For example, in Wyoming, the coal rights were severed first because they were mining for coal. And then beneath the coal, you had oil and natural gas. So when we buy minerals, we try to buy the whole suite of minerals. And in most cases, we do own everything that could be produced below the surface, whether it was like a lithium mine or something else. But in most of the areas we're buying, Melissa, it's pretty much all oil and gas. But there are other stuff that could be discovered someday. And I think that's one of the things that people enjoy about the mineral space. It's, there's a lot of option value that could be realized in the future that you don't have to pay for today. And the space has gotten a lot more competitive, but minerals is a staple of what we do here at Phoenix. We've been doing it for 5.5 years now in Texas, North Dakota, Montana, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming. It's a big part of our business. So we know it pretty well. But yes, we are focused on the oil and gas portion of the mineral estate. And that's the most valuable portion, just to be very candid. That's what people are after.
Okay. And I know, like we were talking about, the Texas oil and gas industry continues to make the news, both in finance and just employment opportunities. I know we just saw that they, again, saw a rise in employment opportunities for people in the state of Texas. And I don't know if that's in other areas that they do, the same type of thing. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in that sector?
Yeah, for sure. So we started with, and I think this is kind of a story that you'll hear from a lot of the startup companies in Texas as well. In 2019, this company was started with 5 people. Today, there's about 130 direct employees. And if you count contractors in the field, and you're talking hundreds. So the oil and gas industry has grown quite a bit coming out of COVID. I mean, COVID was a shock to the system for all of us. And but coming out of COVID, things have picked up a lot and maintained sort of a healthy supply-demand balance in the world. And, America produces over 12 million barrels a day. So at this point in time, the American energy industry is important to the entire world. And yes, so I would just say there's hiring going on everywhere still. It's a very strong market for folks looking for work in this industry, both field workers, welders, mechanics, crane operators, rig hands, you name it. And then also technical professionals, engineers, geoscientists, and also accountants. We're right now trying to find accountants that understand oil and gas. And, I was talking to you a little bit beforehand. It's difficult to find young folks that want to come into the industry now. And we do a lot to try to encourage that. We have a scholarship program at Phoenix that's targeting folks that want to pursue a career in oil and gas. But yes, we're actively hiring. Texas is sort of the epicenter. I would say we have a Dallas office, a little easier to find oil and gas folks in Texas than Irvine, California. But we're doing our part in every state that we operate and have a presence. But yes, the job market for energy is quite strong. And, candidly, I'll make one more statement about that. The green movement, it's something we hear a lot about in the news, and it's a flashy headline and it sounds great to some people, maybe not so great to other folks. But the reality is you still need oil and gas. Regardless of how many solar panels you import from China, you still need our product, whether you like us or not. And so we're trying to do our part and, get beyond the noise and just focus on the task at hand, which is we need to deliver more energy for America. That's what we need to do. And that's what we're doing. And it requires people to do that. It's a very labor intensive space. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I even heard too, the report was saying more women are getting involved in that industry as well. So that's kind of cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we welcome all. We, if you can do the job, doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, we welcome you. In fact, we've just hired a few accountants recently that we found some, and they're all women, and we're happy to welcome them into this space.
Now, another thing they're talking about is, the energy sector in general is seeing great growth, but I know this might be something a little bit, I know they were talking about with BRICS and that type of thing, all these different things that are going on as far as them trying to get away from the dollar and stuff. Now, how important, if you can comment on it, how important is it for the U.S. to have a good, oil and gas economy, to have that? And, we have things like that going on globally, or we could run into issues.
I think it's absolutely critical. And I'm not the economist, but I like to break things down into really simple terms. I mean, the U.S. dollar is being devalued from the excessive spending in America. But the one thing that you can't devalue is hard assets. So our whole business model is built around this thesis. You can't print oil. You can't print natural gas. You can't print gold. You can print dollars, but you can't print the hard assets. And so I think other countries, if you just want to focus on the BRICS issue, it's been talked about for a long time, but a lot of these countries, there's two reasons. They don't want to trade in dollars because they don't want to hold dollar denominated accounts that the U.S. government could seize. And that's one reason. And these countries also have hard assets. So they have the thing that can't be manipulated. And I think they understand the importance of that. And if they can trade without the dollar, that's bad for America. But if I shift to what can America do to combat some of that possible negativity, is we can produce more resources too. Russia, their economy is driven by oil and natural gas. They are rich in resources. America has more resources than Russia. So if we're going to compete on the global scene in terms of who has the most resource potential, America can't really be stopped. And, I talk about natural gas a lot. It's a product that everyone's been bullish on natural gas for so long, but the prices have been historically low for a really long time because at some point, hopefully, our government starts to focus on common sense policies and lets America supply natural gas to the world. We can produce gas cheaper than anywhere on planet Earth, and we have a lot of it. And we can put it on a ship and send it anywhere. And that makes sense for America, and we need to do more of that. We need to be exporting American energy and competing with some of the countries in the Middle East that are doing it, because we can do it better. And so when I think about BRICS and kind of the state of the world, our focus is we believe in hard assets in this kind of environment, and that's what we own. That's what our investors want access to. And so, we raise capital from investors directly. And the story that they are excited about is we take dollars, something that can be manipulated, and we buy oil, something that cannot be manipulated. And I think that trade-off is attractive to investors nowadays. And that's our whole business. That's what we do. We're not sitting on dollars, we're sitting on barrels. And we're pretty comfortable with that in this framework. And I think the folks in Texas that are active in our industry, of which there's many, I think they feel very similarly.
And now, the other thing I guess I wanted to touch upon, so how much, let's say exporting it. How much are we importing gas, quite a bit of it, oil and gas from other countries?
So it's a good question. So the flows of products are very complicated. And so we don't have time to get into every nuance, and I don't know every nuance because they are complicated. But in general, we consume more oil than we produce. That's been the case for a long, long time. Is it a lot more? Well, it's not a ton more, but it is more. And natural gas, we have enough natural gas to be self-sustaining. We don't have to import natural gas. Like a lot of countries, I'll give you an example, Japan and South Korea. They have no resource. They have to import all of it. And so there's countries that are net importers and countries that are net exporters. We export some in America. We could export more, but America is self-sufficient on natural gas, but not crude oil. And there's another challenge, not on refined products. So not only do you need oil, you need refined products, because oil by itself is useless. You need to turn it into something else, like jet fuel, diesel, gasoline. And so the biggest refineries in the world have been built in places like India in the last 7 or 8 years, because it's really hard to build stuff in America. But America's refining machine is probably the most efficient in the world, and it produces a lot of end products, but America still imports end products too. So our energy industry in general is complicated, but I think it benefits all Americans if we can produce what we need here 100%, and then also deliver the rest of the world what we can produce here too. And that should be a reality for both crude oil and natural gas, because we do have enough of it. It's just a question of, will the federal government be more friendly to this industry? And, for example, Texas is great because Texas doesn't have any federal land. That's why Texas is very efficient and they move very quickly, because you don't have to deal with the federal government. Whereas you go to places like Wyoming, 80% of the land is owned by the federal government. So to be able to drill it, you have to go through the feds in some capacity. And we do that. We have a presence in Wyoming. We know how that works. It's very slow. And in North Dakota, same thing. Now, North Dakota is not 80% federal. It's probably 20, 25. But we deal with it there too, where the federal government is slowing things down. And, the pace of their movement changes from one administration to the next. And, what we tell everyone is quite simple. It doesn't matter whether you're Democrat or Republican. Energy in America is good for every American, no matter how you vote. And we should have common sense policies around that. And it shouldn't change from one administration to the next. And that's my hope going into election season, regardless of what the outcome is. American energy is good for all Americans, and we need to stop demonizing it and start embracing it. And that starts with the federal government opening more lands for leasing and not, sitting on the sidelines when there's litigation around leasing of federal lands, to actively support the industry, because we create jobs and we add value to all Americans. And that's something that we should kind of take seriously. And I hope that happens here in the next 3 months.
Yeah, definitely. And as we're moving into 2025, what are some trends that you think we're going to see, in your opinion?
So there's been steady growth in the industry, so I think that'll continue, but it's been cautious growth. And I think that folks, the oil and gas industry is notorious for boom and bust. I've been in the business 20 years now, and there's been, call it 3 cycles that have been pretty bad. And I think now we've gotten more conservative with how we make investment decisions, which I think is good for the overall industry. So that trend is positive. And there's been a lot of M&A lately. So the growth that has been happening has been through acquisitions. The big ones are Chevron Hess, ExxonMobil Pioneer, which is a big one for Texas and West Texas. So that trend will probably continue. But I think the one thing that will be important is what happens in the American election, and what does that mean for pricing? And I think all in all, the industry has been underinvested in over the last 5 years. I think most reasonable people believe worldwide demand will go up, not down. And if those two things are true, then there has to be an increase in the pace of investing in this space. So more dollars have to come into oil and gas, because this industry requires a lot of capital investment. To get barrels out of the ground and to maintain the production that we just need to run the world, you need to put more dollars in it. And that's an area that we have attacked at Phoenix Capital Group. The banks are coming back a little more recently, but they've been difficult over the last 5 years. A lot of big banks have pulled back from this space. And so the private equity firms have tried to fill that gap. I don't think it's been done very efficiently. And so we have gone to private placements. So we've kind of cut the banks and the private equity firms out, and we've gone directly to retail investors through exempt securities like Regulation D, Regulation A+, to bring capital into the industry that's needed. And that's how we've grown. Our drilling rigs that are running now, they were financed with exempt security offerings, and our 5,000-ish investors. So that's the approach we've taken. And I think that trend will continue as well. People are getting more creative because the value is there. So for guys like me or my peers in the industry, there's value in these investments. There's investors that want steady yields, and this asset class can produce them, it's natural that those two groups of people find each other and go develop more acreage. So the big picture trends, I think M&A continues. I think investment in the industry continues to increase. And I think more creative ways to finance different ventures are going to increase too. And so that's kind of my prediction for the next few years, but we're bullish. It's not surprising that an oil guy is bullish on oil, but I think the long-term trends are pretty clear. And I'll highlight one more thing and then we can go to another topic. During COVID, the smartest people in the room said that there might be a period of time in the near future where the world only needs 30 million barrels a day. And there were articles written all over the place about that. The world doesn't need oil anymore. Well, that's funny. We're consuming more today than we ever have in the history of the human race. And that trend is continuing. So I would just challenge the mainstream narrative on our industry is usually wrong. And it was during COVID. And in order to meet the demand of the world, we need to keep investing in this industry. And America is at the center of that. We're the largest producer in the world. And there's a close second and third. It's America, Russia, Saudi Arabia. We're all at the top, but all three of us are needed. And so at the end of the day, in America is the most efficient machine out of those three. And so the American energy industry is critical. And it's important to the entire world that we keep doing what we do here in America and do it well.
And I guess the only other thing that we're talking about, well, energy sector in general, I know you deal in oil and gas mainly, but the energy sector in general, do you see that that's going to grow as well? Other types of energy?
Absolutely. And I'm not an expert in this arena, but I know enough to be dangerous. And it's pretty clear that the electricity consumption per capita is going up in America. It's no surprise. We're all on tablets, smartphones. Our kids are on it all day. So it's not shocking that everyone's consuming more electricity. And now with the shift to possibly more electric transit, like in terms of the Tesla and vehicles, where's the electricity going to come from? Has to go up. And so I think, another report I saw recently that was very telling was Florida versus California. And I live in California, and they have a hard time keeping the lights on in heat waves in the summer. And you'll even see signs on the main interstates, don't plug in your your electric car now because the grid can't support it. And so Florida's electricity prices are about half of what they are in California because California has a bunch of renewables on the grid that are inefficient. The renewables can't power a grid. That's factually true. So you need backup. And where does the backup come from? Natural gas. So I do see that trend continuing as more renewables are placed on grids. The grids are going to become more unstable and you still need the backup with natural gas. And so I do think that space is evolving. And I think we're going to revert back to normalcy because people are going to realize I don't want to pay more for unreliable energy. That's not a good trade-off. And we should kind of go back to what works and what's actually more affordable. Because if our electricity prices are through the roof in America, we become less competitive relative to China. China doesn't really care about, I think the headlines you see out of China are a little bit questionable. They're building coal plants right and left in China. Why are they building coal plants? It's cheap and it's reliable. So their electricity cost is cheap, and electricity is the input for all manufacturing. You can't make anything without electricity. And if your prices in America are 4x what they are in China, who's going to make a cheaper, more valuable product? It's going to be China. And so I do see that as an area in America that's going to be evolving and changing. And it's critically important. And I do hope most of the country starts to look at places like Florida and say, gee whiz, that model seems to work pretty good. Maybe we should do that instead of trying to do what California is doing, which is just insane. And I think if you ask any rational human, when you look at it, it doesn't make sense. You shouldn't subject your citizens to these prices. It's not necessary and it's not helping anyone. It's actually hurting the population. So, and we have the same thing with gasoline prices in California, which is another issue. But yeah, I do see the overall energy mixture in America becoming, it's a topic of conversation. A lot more people are talking about it now. And I think that's a good thing. And hopefully we start getting back to normalcy. That's my goal. And wherever I can be an advocate, and, there's plenty of other people that are fighting the good fight. Chris Wright at Liberty Resources, or Liberty Energy, I guess is their official name, is always out there on the pulpit, sort of spreading the virtues of oil and gas from a common sense standpoint. And, we just need more people in our space to speak up and join the debate and start to shift public perception on this industry and how vital it is, really. All parts of it.
Yeah, definitely, and get the word out because they only hear a lot of people only hear one side, but they don't hear that, there's a middle ground too. You need it. It's got to be there. Just like with when you like the hurricanes come, we were talking about that a little bit. Then you have the generators, and you can't run generators on electricity.
No, you need diesel and gasoline and natural gas. And I want to be clear, I am not anti solar and wind.
Yeah,
There's places where maybe it does make sense, but we can't be just, my collective group says this, therefore we must do this. We just got to be reasonable about things as a society. And that's sort of my view on things. And where solar makes sense, private companies will do it. If it doesn't make sense, they won't. And I think the private industry will determine what's ultimately the cheapest, most valuable thing to deliver to a consumer. They're really good at that. And, when government sort of gets in the way, it disrupts that natural mix that would have been the most optimal for all of us. So yeah, we need to return to common sense. I think that's the message there.
and now as we wrap it up, anything else that you'd like to add to the subject?
For the point that oil and gas is going to be here for a long time. We tell a lot of our investors this. No one can predict the future, but what I can tell you is for the next 20 years, there is no scenario feasible where we're not consuming large volumes of oil and natural gas. There's none. So 20 years is a really long time. We need more professionals to join this industry. Our industry offers some of the best pay and benefits packages out of all industries in the world. And it's a demanding industry. It's not easy. Requires a little bit of travel to sometimes some maybe not so nice places. The desert of West Texas or the middle of North Dakota, but the jobs pay really well. And we need more young folks to consider careers in this industry. And even the trades, the trades are so important. When I go to North Dakota and I see all the men and women that are driving trucks, welding, pipe fitting, taking care of the trailers on the locations for the drilling rig, catering for the drilling crews, all these are really high paying jobs. And we need them in America. Not everyone's going to be a PhD scientist. There are some men and women that are going to choose to go work with their hands, and those jobs have dignity, and we should embrace and encourage them. And I also tell people, and this is a little bit more of a punchy talking point, Google's not hiring these people. They're not hiring truck drivers, pipe fitters, welders, but the oil and gas industry does. We are the blue collar industry that keeps America together. And I think all people should be able to get on board with that. And I kind of go back to that. Doesn't matter how you vote. You should believe that there's dignity in labor, and there's a lot of quality labor to be done in this industry that pays very well. And in many states, Wyoming, North Dakota, Utah, Texas, even now in Ohio and Pennsylvania, the industry has sort of been revitalized in those two states. And when I first joined the industry in 2005, there was nothing going on in Ohio and Pennsylvania. They were like dying relics in the industry. Fast forward 20 years, they're booming. Why are they booming? Because of oil and natural gas. That's why. And same with West Virginia. And so that's just something that I like to talk about whenever I get an opportunity to share the story of our industry. It's the story of the blue collar men and women that deserve to have high paying jobs, and our industry offers them in spades. And that's something that we should all be able to embrace. That's a good thing.